Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today, it's a stare down between the Blancpain 50 Fathoms Bathyscaphe on full bracelet and the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Sea-Dweller 4000, also known as the Sea-Dweller 43, also known as the Red Sea-Dweller, also known as the 50th anniversary. Let's start with the Challenger. Now, this is an interesting watch because I've waited for its arrival long time. This is a bracelet that almost reminds me of Watch Components by Michael Bay. This is like something you expect on military-grade equipment. It's like something that a German sports watch brand like Zinn or Damasco would make. You can see that this reference 70 bracelet, 70B, which must be for beast, features hex key individual removable links. I can't tell you the last time I saw hex key removable links on a bracelet that wasn't German. Now, the watch is 43 millimeters in diameter, and in every other respect, it is the Bathyscaphe that debuted back at Bezel World 2013, which means it's a bit more of a subdued, stripped down 50 Fathoms, technically identical in movement and diving depth to the 5015, but a bit less glam rock and a bit more grunge. Now, I'm going to throw this one on the wrist. 43 millimeters, it's a relatively flat 43. I have no issues wearing this watch comfortably on a wrist of 16 centimeters circumference, even with the bracelet. Bracelets can change the ergonomic equation, especially on a watch that feels and generally is designed for a strap. It's hard to find these on a bracelet. I've been waiting for months to actually shoot this comparison. The watch is thin. It's only 13.5 millimeters thick, so that compares rather favorably to the 15.2 of the Rolex. You can see lug-to-lug, two ways to measure this one. 49.5 lug-to-lug if you include the solid end links of the bracelet. It protrudes out 52.4, and the spacing is a very modern 23 millimeters. So if you wanted to throw this one on a strap, you're going to have to buy a big strap, but this is a more natural and organic match for a strap than the Rolex. It's a comfortable timepiece. It's really the slim profile that endears it to me most. It's understated, and as you can see, every facet of the case, the bezel, and the bracelet is of satin finish. So this is a very low-key and chill, high-luxury watch. Let's talk a little bit about the spec of the bracelet and the experience of the bracelet. Now, it is a little bit more inclined to vent the wrist than the X71 on the standard 5015. As you can see, there are plenty of hollows on the underside. This one will not grip skin, pull hair, or trap wrist heat, and you get a better sense of those individual key slots for this overbuilt bracelet. And by the way, the bracelet feels incredibly solid in spite of the large gaps between the links. Now, there is no deployant clasp here, but what you can do if you want is you can just open one side and then wear it over a dive suit. The trigger system internally is so slick you can barely see them. As you can see, the integration into the chassis of the clasp is remarkably handsome, and that's a piece of the watch you're unlikely to see on a regular basis. So this one thoughtfully designed. A more stripped down 50 Fathoms, and you can see that outboard. It's a little bit like an Omega CK2998, the modern version today, because the beveling's there, but it's minimalist. The lug ends are squared off, there's a satin flank, the bezel's all of satin, and as you can see, it has a sort of vintage big crown, no guard aesthetic on the crown side. The crown is an absolute pleasure to use. The knurling is deep and sharp. This one's easy to grip. Let's listen to the bezel. It is very loud. This one has a detent that is almost too crisp. There's a ton of resistance in the system, and while the individual detents are rock solid and almost sound like the 4th of July, the timepiece could do with slightly deeper knurling on the bezel to make this rather resilient and resistant mechanism a bit easier to operate. That said, the liquid metal, and you know this from Omega, is a wonderful fusion of metal elements into ceramic, so you wind up with a very well-protected watch that features the ceramic inserts, the sapphire crystal on the top, and a bezel that, for better or worse, is probably one of the chunkiest you will ever encounter. If you like a refined bezel, this isn't for you. If you like Panerai Luminor Submersible or Doxa subtype bezels, you're going to love this one. You can see applique dimple style, some might say nipple style hour indices, and then you have vintage 70s inspired baton with extensions, and of course you've got that lovely little bob on the counterweighted constant seconds hand. There's a sunburst at center. It's not the lacquer treatment that you see on the standard 50 Fathoms. And of course, there is a date window that's integrated between the indices. Whether you like or don't like the integration of a date window as a index replacement or amongst the indices, the bottom line is that this is a very easy one to read with a white on black base. Turn it all over, and this is where things get a whole lot more interesting than the Rolex, because the movement here is just, well, it's more interesting because you can see it. It's more interesting because it's a 120-hour power reserve with 3 mainspring barrels. It's more interesting because it features a silicone hairspring, as well as impressive hand finishing, mirrored anglage, a handsome brushed finish rather than Côte de Genève across the bridges, black polished screw heads. You can see there's an 18-karat gold mass with a lovely satin and blasted profile, and it's been PVD darkened to an anthracite. You can see that it's free sprung for shock resistance. It beats away at 4 Hertz, and of course everything here is quite lovely. The detailing is high horology, and the movement base is the 13 RO Les Brassus collection ultra haute de gamme manual wind movement. So that's where this watch comes from. 300 meters water resistant, quick set date, and of course you've got a stop seconds function with a screw down crown. So the watch is basically everything you need for diving, and then a bracelet that's overkill in almost any situation, but lovely. Like I said, that's sort of a bracelet by Michael Bay, whereas the Rolex is a bit more of a classicist piece. Now this is a watch that came out in 2017 for the 50th anniversary of the Sea-Dweller. It was remarkable in a couple of respects. First, it was the return of the much loved red Sea-Dweller script, but it was also the first Sea-Dweller to use a Cyclops eye magnifier. For some folks, that's going to be advantage Blancpain. For others who are purely functional and pragmatic, it does make the date easier to read. Let's zoom out a little bit. Now you can see the watch. 43 millimeters in diameter, but considerably chunkier, 15.2 millimeters thick rather than 13.5. The watch is also broader across the wrist. Just counting the case, we're talking 50.4, but if you include the solid end links of the bracelet, then it's actually about 53.6. 21 millimeter spacing, but most folks are not going to throw this watch on a strap, even if impressive aftermarket options do now exist. The Oyster Bracelet is principally of satin finish, though it does feature a little bit of polished glam on its side. You can see the high polish on the flanks. Rather than hex screws, you have all removable links fixed by conventional screws. So if you have a little bit of a kit for swapping straps, chances are you're going to be easy sizing your bracelet. Internally, interesting clasp. You can see there's actually a beacon hook system, so when it's closed, you can't pull it open. It's a primary lock, it's a lift lock system, so a vertical trigger. And then you have a second clamshell system with a little bit of a revetment or a kerf inside so you can dig your finger in. It's easy to use. It's also very user-friendly. You can see it's got 2 different adjustment mechanisms. It's got the Glidelock system that you know from the sub, but it's also got a flip lock system so you can pull out the extension. Between the two, it's about 2 inches or SI 50 millimeters of extension. And I like the fact that you can use it either for precise sizing with the slider, or you can use it as an all-out extension over a wetsuit, a dry suit, or just a thick winter coat or sweater. Now, the case is significantly more prominent, first because it's bigger and thicker than the Blancpain, and second because the sides are almost black polished. It's truly impressive how Rolex executes the polish on the flanks of its cases, and I want to show the 2 watches sapphire to sapphire so you get a better sense of just how much thicker the Rolex is than the Blancpain. You can see a lot of the thickness, despite the fact that it is a much thicker watch, is in the case back. So on the wrist, the Rolex sits surprisingly low. I like the elegance of the Blancpain, but as a practical measure, the Rolex really does not feel that thick. A lot of that, the case back, and of course you can see the bezel. This is where the Rolex pulls ahead a bit. The knurling is deep and sharp, and as you can see, it's a combination of satin inboard and polished outer facing. There's a Cerachrom ceramic bezel, which has lovely little wells that are filled with deposits of platinum, so you get a bit of precious metal with your Rolex Sea-Dweller. The feel is incredibly crisp. 120 clicks, let's hear it. It's butter. It feels more like the 50 Fathoms 5015 as opposed to the reference 5000 Bathyscaphe. Now the dial's a little bit easier to read by day. You can see at standard Mercedes hours, you've got a 4,000 foot test depth. Of course, this being a Rolex diver, it's tested to 25% beyond 4,000 feet. So you got a 5,000 foot diver in practice. You've got a helium escape valve for you saturation divers, and unlike Omega, you don't have to manually actuate it, and you don't have to worry about it like a wart on a hog. It basically hides away until you need it. The dial features white gold indices and hands, as well as a lacquer base, and it is quite lovely. Stop second and quick set date underneath the case back. Rolex manufacturer caliber 3235, superlative chronometer, meaning not only does it meet the COSC, but it meets the additional standard of Rolex, which is -2+2 or better per 24 hours as a fully cased up watch, not a bare movement as with the COSC. A thinned out mainspring barrel with a bigger mainspring attendant. It also has a reprofiled train and the new Chronergy escapement, which is basically Rolex's answer to Omega's coaxial. Omega went with something exotic, Rolex went with refinement. So this is a 70-hour power reserve. It still can't compete with the Blancpain, but it is significantly more than the old 3135's 48. Of course, parachrom blue over coil, so not quite as anti-magnetic as the silicon in the Bathyscaphe, but still fairly hardened. Full balance bridge, one feature you don't get on the Bathyscaphe, makes this watch perhaps a little bit more shock resistant. Both are free sprung. The Rolex movement can't be seen, but if you could see it, Rolex has improved the general quality of its finishing. It's just not on the level of the Bathyscaphe. So let's read our roster of advantages. First, if you manage to buy one of these new, and you can find them, this is not the hottest Rolex watch at the moment, you can buy for $11,350 new and count on the watch reliably reselling for around $15 to $15.5 grand if you want to move it. Of course, this is a watch that features a superior clasp. Not only do you get the clamshell system, so the double lock, but you get two extension systems, the Glidelock, incremental up to 20 millimeters, and then you've got the Fliplock system. Compared to the Bathyscaphe that has essentially no native extension system, this is a big advantage, especially for those who just want to make incremental adjustments and not do an all-out fold. So this is a watch that is also a little bit tougher, 1,220 meters plus the helium escape. It's capability that's there if you want it, and luxury is about getting more than you expect and more than you need. So on that basis, advantage Rolex. Rolex cachet, it's a real thing. It's why this watch sells for $11,350 and resells for about $15 to $15.5 grand. This is a watch that can stand shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Richard Mille and Patek Philippe. And when you can buy a watch for just over 11 grand and stand in that company on the basis of status and stature, not for me, but that speaks volumes about the brand equity of Rolex. I'll also mention that this is a bit of an historic model, the first ever Cyclops eye on a Sea-Dweller, the rebirth of the Red Sea-Dweller, the 50th anniversary Sea-Dweller. I don't know how long this model will be made, but it's already a historically important piece. I will also add that the watch has a 5-year warranty. Blancpain will give you a 2-year warranty from the factory, and if you buy at a boutique and register, you get an extra year of warranty, but still, we're talking a best case scenario 3 years for Blancpain against 5 years for Rolex, so advantage Sea-Dweller. Finally, I think that this is probably the obvious choice to buy new. If you can buy this at list, it's really a no-lose. Even if you just want to date it and not marry it, you can ultimately move it and get all your money back and then some. Now let's talk about the Blancpain. This is a watch that appeals to me because selling for $13,100 new, so it is a bit more expensive new than the Rolex. This is the pre-owned buy at $8 to $9 grand, and that's on the bracelet. So I'm impressed by the accessibility of this piece relative to the Rolex. Available to buy pre-owned, and although you'll have trouble finding it on the bracelet, when you do, the price is right. Let's talk about the display caseback and the superior caliber finish. There's really no comparing this movement to the Rolex. Even if you were to display caseback, the Rolex, it would not be finished, hand finished no less, to the degree of this 13-15 caliber, and the fact that you can see it is advantage Blancpain. I'll also mention that with an extra couple of days of power reserve, we're talking 120 hours to 70. That is a decisive advantage in favor of this watch. So if an aggressive diver is not your everyday, you don't need to wear this watch daily or even every couple of days to keep it wound and functional. And it's also important to note that with the silicone hairspring, this one is truly hardened, amagnetic, against the kind of flux you'll find in high-powered home and office environments. Let's talk about straps. If you want to wear your watch on a strap, a modern Rolex doesn't look right on a strap, whereas the Bathyscaphe is generally seen on straps and it looks the business. You'll have to get a 23, but you'll have plenty of OEM options, and aftermarket can always go custom. It's a more natural match if you're a strap traditionalist. I'll also mention that the timepiece has slightly better lumen. You'll see that a little bit later in the video. There's no Cyclops eye, nor do you need it. I can see that it's the fourth. Problem solved. There are no crown guards. The simplicity of the case flank imparts no additional vulnerability. I've never seen a crown sheared when it's on a person's wrist. That's usually one of those cases where you're looking at about 20 hours of microsurgery to put the hand back together. I'll also mention that the Mad Max bracelet is absolutely insane. It feels incredible. It looks incredible. The quality is self-evident, and it's an absolute treat. It's an experience you will never get with a box stock Rolex Oyster. Finally, I like the fact that this watch is a bit subdued, no high polish, and that definitely works for me. I am a low-key guy. So which one do I like better? Well, obviously the Rolex is the one to buy new and the Blancpain is the one to buy pre-owned. But when you add the technical advantages, the subdued finish, the inherent simplicity, the slimmer case, the better fit on a smaller wrist, I'm all about the Bathyscaphe, especially on this bracelet. You guys let me know which of these two watches do you favor for your watch box and your wrist. Rolex has a better bezel pearl, whereas Blancpain is just brighter overall. Easier to read the time on the Bathyscaphe than the Sea-Dweller. Both are good, the Blancpain is just a little bit better.